Okay, Luis, thank you very much. Buenos dias. Good morning. I want to talk today mostly about how we take the next steps in building a more powerful movement to end the war on drugs and to end, essentially, drug prohibition throughout the world. I think if I were to detail all of the problems of prohibition, I would simply be repeating what so many people said so eloquently yesterday. But I also want to challenge some of you to think in new ways about the forces that are really driving the war on drugs, especially as the war on drugs emanates from the United States. Our capacity to organize and act strategically and politically so that we actually make a difference in our lifetimes is dependent to some good extent on how sophisticated and how honest our own analysis is of the problems. It's one thing to know what you believe, but it can be a mistake to take what you believe and interpret all the information that comes in through a single lens. Understanding what drives the United States, for example, is not so simple. So let me begin by saying this, and I will try to keep talking slowly, although I normally talk about 10 times this fast. First, there is a growing movement around the world to end drug prohibition. It exists in the United States and in Latin America. It exists in Australia and Canada and Europe and now in Asia. It is people coming from different places with different ideas and different concerns, but all of us seeing the war on drugs as a fundamental evil in our own societies and around the world. I see the war on drugs as essentially a cancer eating away at what is good about my country and what is potentially good about all of international society. Now, what do I mean when I speak of the war on drugs? We use that phrase rhetorically, but what exactly does the war on drugs mean? I think it boils down to two things. First, it is the presumption, the assumption that criminalization and the criminal justice system must be at the forefront of our drug policy. It is the belief that this is primarily a problem to be solved by police and prisons and prosecutors and military, with a little lip service for the people who do prevention and treatment. It is why in the United States, when our government appoints a drug czar, a director of national drug policy, they do not choose a doctor or a health professional. They choose a former police chief or a former general or a professional moralist or a right-wing ideologue. So the first thing that must be challenged is that criminalization and criminal justice are at the forefront rather than on the sidelines. To challenge the basic view that with some drugs, with alcohol, with cigarettes, with coffee, with others, the criminal justice system exists at the edges to deal with those people who act irresponsibly towards others. But that with these other drugs, with cannabis and coca and cocaine and heroin and the hallucinogens, that criminal justice must be first. That first is the component of the drug war. And the second component, and it is a component which is especially dominant in the United States, is the belief that the only permissible relationship between a human being and these drugs is abstinence, is sobriety. That all of us are better off to be drug-free, a phrase which, of course, we use in a very selective and hypocritical way, that we are all better off being drug-free, and that if need be, we need to be helped, induced, coerced by the government and potentially by our employers and our schools to be drug-free. It's that combination, the dominance of criminalization and the criminal justice system, and the elevation of abstinence as an ideology driving the war on drugs. Now here I want to take the opportunity to explain part of what I think is driving the drug war in the United States and the U.S. drug war around the world. I do not believe that the U.S. war on drugs is driven primarily by the economic self-interest of the United States, or of my government, or of the most powerful forces. Increasingly, we see some economic forces latching on to the war on drugs. We see, for example, the corporations that build prisons. We see the unions of prison guards. We see the politicians who want to build prisons in their districts to create jobs for people. Those are powerful economic interests. But fundamentally, the war on drugs is in opposition to the economic and strategic interests of the United States. It's important to understand a number of things about the war on drugs in the United States in order to better understand the war on drugs outside the United States.